Hi, welcome to the 5% podcast. I'm very delighted to be joined by David Adams from Cavendish Estate Agents. David's very, very experienced estate agent, runs a very successful business, and has recently started working with Gazelle. David, hi, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Brian. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast.
You
Great to
are
be here.
very, very welcome, sir. It's a pleasure to have you here. Do you want to tell our sort of viewers a bit about Cavendish and where you are in the world and a bit of
Yeah,
background
sure.
on the agency?
Yeah, sure. So we're in the north of England. So we straddle the England and Wales border. So we've got offices in Chester, and then also over the Welsh border into Mold and Riffin, into Denbighshire and Flintshire. We've been established since 1993. It was my dad actually that set the company up, and
Brilliant.
I've worked in the business far too long now. I think since 2002, since I was about 14 or 15, sort of Saturday boy, and I took over as MD about 4 or 5 years ago now. And yeah, things are going great, to be honest. We're in a good place at the moment.
Fantastic. What sort of market have you got there? What are you dealing with? What's a typical sort of transaction for you? That sort of stuff.
Yes. So I would say, to be honest, in both sort of areas that we cover, because we've got 3 branches, I would say that the average house price is just shy of 400, probably sort of 385,000 is the sort of properties. Quite a mix. I mean, in Chester, it's your likes of your small terraces, your 3-bedroom semis, really, really popular. Whereas in North Wales, it's perhaps a bit of a split market where we'll deal with quite a lot of small properties, so your sort of terrace properties, but then your upper end of that market, so your big 4, 5, 6-bedroom houses as well. So it's a real mixed bag that we deal with, to be honest.
Fantastic. Well, it's great. There's a family business. That's fantastic. There's too few of those these days.
Yeah,
I suppose mine is as well, because I've got my son works for me as well. So one day he might take this over if he wants to. And so following your footsteps. Well, look, I mean, obviously we've been working together, and what I'm keen to hear from you is, the reasons why that you work with Gazelle, and what your challenges are, and why you felt that was it's the right path for the business to follow.
Yeah. So a few years ago now, I became a mentee with Agents Together, and my first mentor was Ben Madden. And one of the first things he said to me, you almost gave me a bit of a list of people I needed to speak to, and you were one of the first people, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm very friendly with Simon Gates as well.
Yep.
I know Simon very well as well. So Ben and Simon both said, look, you need to have a chat with Bryan from Gazelle. So we obviously had a chat a couple of years ago now, I think it was.
Yep.
And we were in that same sort of position as most agents find themselves in, that you'd say, well, 1 in 3 sales fall through. There's not much we can do about that. That is the average. It's inevitable, isn't it? But actually, there is a solution for that, and we obviously had a chat, and now it's part of our pitch is that we use reservation agreements, deposit agreements, and we've actually created a service which we call Cavendish Secure, where actually you don't have to fall into that category of, once the deal is agreed, that there's a 25% or 30% chance of the deal falling through.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. So let's talk about the public, because a lot of the people that will look at this, agencies that will listen to our podcast, will be considering the same thing that you were considering a while back, and like you would have had the same challenges like I had, which is obviously why I started Gazelle. What's your experience been with customers, with the sellers and buyers? Generally, how is it received? What concerns have they got? Some of them obviously don't do it, like everybody. So let's talk a bit about that and sort of open up that can.
Yeah. I think, to be very honest with you, we've adapted our style, because when we first started working with you, we perhaps didn't have the ideal process internally, whereby we were probably leaving the conversation with the vendor and the purchaser until an offer was on the table, which is far too late.
Yeah.
I mean, well, first of all, what I would say is that if you're an agent, that is using reservation agreements, you need to actually work it into your pitch, so it becomes part of what you do. It's part of your process. But then also there's various different touch points along the line, when the property comes on the market, when the first viewing takes place, et cetera, that is, this is part of our process, that we can basically put an agreement on the table to make this deal, far more secure of going through.
Yeah.
And I think, so we've learned a lot because, when we first started doing it, we were probably leaving it too late until we actually had that conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I think, and I say to my team, I say, look, it does take a brave agent to actually face into friction. And on that market appraisal, when most agents are perhaps sugarcoating, the ideal situation, we're there going, well, do you know what? Let's have a chat about the elephant in the room. 1 in 3 sales fall through, but it doesn't have to be that. And we've actually got a solution for that. Where if we go down this path, you can reduce that fall through rate to about 5%.
Yeah. Well, and that's a very, very good comment you made there. I really like that, face into friction, because we all know what estate agents are like, and without wanting to pigeonhole people, owners, the mentality of owners and MDs and the C-suite are quite markedly different to the troops on the ground, so to speak. We have these, the desires of what we want to do and how we want it done and so on and so on. But when you're actually the person that's doing it, and there's an awful lot to talk about, right? That's the other thing that's important to mention, is that this isn't something that you just add in on top of what you've been doing for 50 years. It's something that is being added to what else has been added to the pitch in a way. But facing into friction, I love that. That's a really, really good way to do it, because when I first started doing Gazelle, and even as an agent, I had no idea what people would say. I had no real idea of whether people would want to do this or they wouldn't want to do it. So I had this sort of nervous challenge in my head of how is this going to be received? And it took me a while to introduce it in a different way. And like you mentioned, timing as well is critical. But actually, one of the things that I remember, and a lot of our agents that work with us talk about, is being able to have a really honest conversation about what is actually happening in the Chester, the Mole market, because everybody else doesn't have that conversation. And really, quite a lot of sellers go into, and I think it's one of the biggest problems we've got, a lot of sellers and buyers to an extent, but sellers mainly, go into the process through rose-tinted glasses. Whatever they've read won't happen to them because their agent, who they're trusting to sell their property or move them, hasn't, that doesn't happen to them, when it does, of course. So how, as an owner, how have you found the best way to get that message to your team to be brave enough to face that? How has that helped, or how have you done that?
Yeah. So again, being very transparent, it's not been easy, because I think when you work with perhaps an established team who have they've been valuers for 10, some 20 years, let's say, they've almost got a pitch sort of nailed, if you like, that they've refined over 15, 20, 10 years, whatever. And it's quite hard to break the mold sometimes. And what we've done over the last few years, we've very much sort of broken the mold on quite a lot of things. And again, we going back a couple of years ago, we probably changed too much too soon. And actually, what we've very much done over the last sort of 12 months, we've gone, right, this is where we want to get to in the next 5 years. So actually, let's do it in bite-sized chunks. So we've learned a lot. And obviously, reservation agreements and our partnership with Gazelle is something, that we're very much focusing on at the moment. And it's almost, we've just got to do it in bite-sized pieces. Because if you do try and reinvent the wheel on, perhaps a team that are quite well established, it is very difficult. If you've got people that are fresh to the industry and it's their first job, then this is the process, then it's a lot easier. But I think if you've got very experienced members of the team, it's quite hard to break that mold, I think.
It's a very, very good point, because I found that with fees particularly. When I took over a business as an agent, and one of my first challenges was to try to increase the fee revenue that we've got, is to put that into an existing valuer who doesn't believe that is possible in that particular location is insanely difficult. And you bring in someone new who's never listed before, train them, and then say, right, that's what we charge. We charge 2%, off you go. How many times do they actually end up getting it? They do, right? I mean, it's just the same, and it is the way. And I don't think it's always about change. It's about belief and mentality. So let's talk about downsides. What potential downsides have you seen, either with the team or with the public, over this? What have you experienced?
I think so when we had a catch up the other week, I think I mentioned this, that we had a couple of solicitors actually who actually said to our clients, "Oh no, don't touch that with a barge pole." But I think, as we alluded to, that it's probably because their perception or their understanding is that they would be left to actually do the agreement, which obviously isn't the case. So again, it's communication. It's actually it's transparency. It's communication. It's actually defining the process and just being very, very transparent with everyone. This is
Yeah.
what we do. This is how we do it. And again, we've learned a lot from that, because we were having these conversations. We were having a couple of solicitors saying, no, do not touch that, because they didn't want to do the work.
Yeah.
Which is fair enough.
Yeah, they don't make enough money to do it, I suppose. That's why.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about, have you had any situations where, a buyer has said, or a seller has said, I don't want to do that, I don't want to make that commitment? And have you had any of those situations?
Yeah, I think it's mainly come down to perhaps lack of understanding, and almost, I think, where we are in the world, and you deal, our North Wales patch is a very different demographic. So our Chester patch that we cover, I would say majority of people we deal with are probably in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Whereas in North Wales, we have a lot of elderly clients who perhaps aren't as tech savvy, who, their last experience of buying a house is very different to that of today. So they're a little bit more resistant, let's say.
Yeah.
But then that's up to us to actually educate our clients, because at the end of the day, something I say to our team a lot is that at the end of the day, we are the experts. So if a client says, no, this is the way I want to do it, if that's not in their best interest, then actually, if we just go along with it, that's actually not serving them. So again, it's that facing into friction. So there's a common theme here. I say to our team, actually, to be a really courageous agent, you've got to face into friction, have those difficult conversations, because you are the professional, and they are ultimately paying for advice. So give them the advice. So we very much structure our market appraisal, valuation, whatever you want to call it, as we're there to give expert advice. We're not there to pitch, to win the business. Obviously, we want to win the business, but the whole mentality is just go out there and give really, really good advice on how to get the best price for your home as fast as possible, and with at least friction, uncertainty as possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't want to hear that advice, because the other agent's gone, oh no, we can get you, 80 grand more. We'll charge a lesser fee. Oh, you don't need to worry about that, AML and all that rubbish.
Yeah.
That doesn't serve the client, does it?
I remember that well when it came to when we first introduced, the contracts being signed in the place of work or home, and all your right to cancel, all that sort of stuff, would happen. So cool. So look, we've got a couple of minutes, about a minute or so left. What advice would you give to your fellow estate agents out there about, not just necessarily gazelle, but reservations or deposits? Because obviously that's another question. Sorry, two questions there. What advice would you give? And looking back at your experiences, you've got the deposit option and the reservation option. Which of those would you find easier to sort of introduce to the public to get your team over the line?
So it might be controversial, but I actually prefer the reservation agreement. To be very honest, I just think it's. I think personally, first of all, I understand it better.
Yeah.
When you understand it better, then it's easy to sell.
Yeah.
But no, I just like the way it works, and I think, coming back to what you said before, my message to any estate agent, it's very, very simple. Would be, look, have a look at your pipeline. Have a look at how many sales you agree last year. So we're recording this in January 2026, aren't we? So look at how many sales you agreed in 2025, and then look at how many went through. Work out what your fall through rate was. Now I know that you've got a stat that when a reservation agreement is in place, then your average fall through rate, is it 5%, 4%? Yeah, 5%. So if you're an estate agent and your fall through rate is 20%, actually that's better than most. But by using this strategy, by working with a partner like Gazelle, if you could reduce that average fall through rate, let's say from 20% down to 15 or even 10% by, having a certain amount of sales that have got a reservation agreement on it, how much more money, how much more pounds and pence would you bank? Also, a really good point is that when a reservation agreement is in place, I think that both parties, there's more an incentive to get the deal over the line quicker. So it's a compound effect. So you can have more deals go through, but also if you can turn your pipeline over quicker, that's double whammy. And then if you can use it as a differentiator, because most agents in your, probably even no agents in your town will have either heard of this or will be doing it. If you're the only agent that can secure their sale and actually have a fall through rate, average of 5%, you can use that to win business. So I would say to any agent out there, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I think the final point on that, which is great, and thank you, is the key element for this is, for me, has always been give it as an option to people. Because, whether, the component parts of an agreement and the compensation and that's all well and good. But actually the reasons behind it are that, and this will never die with me, is that people have the opportunity to make a commitment, but it's their commitment to give. So do I want to give my commitment? If I understand how I do that, and I understand the consequences potentially of giving a commitment or not giving one, etc., either way, then I should be free to make my own choice.
Agreed.
And if you've got that, then you won't have everybody doing it, but you'd have more people, like you say, and the ones that you have, even if it's 10% of your pipeline, well, that 10% is going to be less risky than the other 90%, and then it can build from there.
Yeah, and do you know what? So, the last point here, obviously, so it was announced a few months ago now that they are going to reform the home selling and buying process, and obviously part of that is they're looking at reservation agreements. So this is going to be the norm anyway in a few years. So why not get ahead of why not get one step ahead of the curve?
Make hay while the sun shines, as they say.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. David, thank you ever so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Short and sweet, but that's apparently all we can watch these days.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
All right, Bryan, thank you.